They called me a coward because I refused to touch a rifle. They said I was a liability, a fool who would get us all killed. But right now, atop the jagged hell of Hacksaw Ridge, the world is burning. The order to retreat has been given. The artillery is tearing the earth apart, and every other soldier is scrambling down the cargo nets to safety. I am the only one left. 75 wounded men are lying in the smoke behind me, waiting to die. And I am not leaving. I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, where the air was clean and the Bible was the law. My father was a carpenter, a man who had been hardened by the First World War, and our house was filled with the shadow of that violence. But it was a simple poster on our living room wall that changed my life forever. It showed the 10 Commandments, illustrated. The 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," had a picture of Cain standing over the body of his brother Abel, a club in his hand. I looked at that picture every day. I couldn't understand how a brother could take the life of a brother. I promised God right then that I would never take a life. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, the world exploded in anger. Every young man in Lynchburg was lining up to enlist, burning with a desire for revenge. I felt that same fire. I loved my country. I wanted to serve just as much as anyone else. But I knew I couldn't hold a gun. I saw myself as a conscientious cooperator, not an objector. I wanted to be a combat medic. I wanted to be right there on the front lines, not to take life, but to save it. I figured the Army would understand. I was wrong. Basic training was a nightmare, but not because of the physical drills. It was the isolation. From the moment I refused to pick up a rifle, I became a pariah. The other men in the barracks didn't see a medic. They seen a coward. They saw a weak link in the chain that would get them all killed. At night, while I knelt by my bunk to pray, bullets would fly through the air and hit me in the head. "Holy Jesus," they'd sneer. "Go home, Doss." The officers were worse. They tried everything to break me. They convened hearings to discharge me on a Section 8 for mental instability. They screamed in my face, telling me I didn't belong in the United States Army. One sergeant pulled me aside and told me, dead serious, "Doss, when we get into combat, I'll make sure you don't come back." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise, but I wouldn't leave. I knew my purpose. I carried a small Bible in my pocket, the only weapon I needed. Eventually, they ran out of ways to kick me out. We shipped out to the Pacific, first to Guam, then Leyte, where the sand was hot and the jungle was thick. I did my job. I treated the blisters and the fevers. I proved I could march as far and work as hard as any of them. But the real test hadn't come yet. The real test was waiting for us on a jagged escarpment in Okinawa, a place the maps called the Maeda Escarpment. The soldiers just called it Hacksaw Ridge, Maeda Escarpment. That was the official name on the maps, but we knew it as Hacksaw Ridge. Standing at the bottom, looking up at that 400-foot sheer cliff, it looked like a wall built by the devil himself to keep us out of Japan. The Navy had pounded it with shells for days, but the rock was honeycombed with caves and tunnels. The Japanese army wasn't on the ridge. They were inside it, and they were waiting. We had to climb cargo nets just to reach the plateau. I remember the weight of the medical bags cutting into my shoulders as I hauled myself up, hand over hand, praying that a machine gun wouldn't open up and cut the ropes. When I finally pulled myself over the lip of the cliff, I stared into a wasteland. The artillery had blasted away every tree, every bush. There was no cover, just jagged rock and mud. Then the world ended. The Japanese opened fire from hidden pillboxes and spider holes. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Mortars rained down so thick you could walk on the smoke. Men I had eaten breakfast with were torn apart in seconds. The noise was physical. It rattled your teeth and shook your bones. I didn't have a rifle to return fire. I didn't have a grenade to throw. I had bandages, I had morphine, and I had a job to do. I ran into the open. "Medic! Medic!" The cry was coming from everywhere. I zigzagged through the explosions, crawling through the mud to reach the boys who had been hit. I dragged them behind rocks, plugged their wounds, and whispered that they were going to be okay, even when I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. I remember treating a man with his chest blown open, the bullets kicking up dirt right next to my boots. I wasn't brave, I was just too busy to be scared. For days, we fought for every inch of that rock. We'd take ground, and they'd push us back. But on May 5th, the enemy launched a massive counterattack. A banzai charge. Thousands of them came screaming out of the smoke. Bayonets fixed, totally overwhelming our lines. The order came down the line, screaming over the radio, "Retreat! Pull back! Get to the nets!" Panic took over. It was a stampede. My whole company turned and ran for the cliff edge, sliding down the ropes to safety. The artillery was walking closer, churning the ground into a graveyard. I stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at safety. Then I looked back into the smoke. I could hear them, the moans of the men left behind. The men who had called me a coward. They were bleeding out in the dirt, alone with the enemy. The officers were screaming at me to jump. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't coming down. I was alone. The rest of the American army was at the bottom of the cliff, eating rations and digging in for the night. Up on the plateau, it was just me, the enemy, and the dying. The Japanese were moving through the dark like wolves, looking for any American left behind to finish them off. I could hear their footsteps in the mud. I could hear the thwack of bayonets hitting bodies. I knew if they found me, an unarmed medic, it would be over. But I couldn't leave. Every few feet, I stumbled over a body. I'd check for a pulse. If it was there, I'd grab them by the collar and drag them. The mud was slick with blood and oil. I had to move low, crawling on my belly so the patrols wouldn't spot my silhouette against the night sky. I wasn't a big man. I weighed maybe 150 pounds, soaking wet. But adrenaline and God gave me strength I didn't know I had. I dragged them to the edge of the escarpment, one by one. But how to get them down? The cargo nets had been cut or were too dangerous. So I tied a rope around a tree stump. I remembered a knot I'd learned back home, a double bowline. It made a sling that could hold a man's legs and chest secure. I wrapped the rope around the stump to create friction, because my hands couldn't hold the weight alone. I lowered the first man down into the darkness. 40 feet, 60 feet. "You're gonna be all right," I whispered. When the rope went slack, I knew he was safe. Then I pulled the rope back up and turned back into the hellscape. My hands started to bleed. The rope burned through the skin, then the meat. My muscles were screaming, trembling so bad I could barely tie the knots. Every time I dropped a man off the edge, I prayed the same prayer. It became the only thing keeping me moving. I didn't pray for safety. I didn't pray for the war to end. I just prayed, "Lord, please help me get one more." Just one more. I'd go back into the dark, find another boy, drag him, lower him. "Lord, help me get one more." I did this for 12 hours straight. Japanese soldiers walked within feet of me. At one point, I was treating a man when a patrol passed so close, I could have touched their boots. I held my breath, burying my face in the dirt, praying the shadows would swallow me. They moved on. I picked the man up and dragged him to the edge. As the sun began to rise, the sky turning a bruised purple, I lowered the last man down. I was the only one left. My uniform was stiff with dried blood, none of it mine. I stumbled to the edge, grabbed the rope, and swung myself down the cliff face. When my boots hit the ground at the bottom, the men looked at me like they were seeing a ghost. The same men who had thrown boots at me, who had called me a coward, stood there with their mouths open. They counted the wounded I had sent down. There were 75 of them, 75 men who were supposed to be dead, breathing, because I wouldn't leave. The way the men looked at me changed after that night. No one called me a coward anymore. They didn't even call me Doc. They just looked at me with a quiet kind of thanks that didn't need words. But the war didn't stop because of one miracle. We had to keep pushing south, into the teeth of the Japanese defense. 2 weeks later, on May 21st, my luck finally ran out. We were in a night attack near Shuri. A Japanese grenade landed in a foxhole with me and 3 other men. I didn't think, I just put my boot over it. The explosion felt like a sledgehammer shattering my legs. I was blown into the air, 17 pieces of shrapnel embedded in my body. For 5 hours, I lay in the mud, treating my own wounds, refusing to call out for a medic because I didn't want anyone risking their life to come get me. When the litter bearers finally reached me, we started moving back. But then we saw another soldier, wounded worse than me. I rolled off the stretcher. "Take him," I told them. "I can wait." While I waited, a sniper's bullet smashed into my left arm, shattering the bone. I was alone, unable to walk, with a broken arm and bleeding legs. I did the only thing I could do. I crawled 300 yards to the aid station, and to keep my arm from flopping around, I found a broken rifle stock and used it as a splint. It was the first time I had ever used a gun in the war, and I used it to hold myself together. In the chaos of the evacuation, I realized I had lost something more important to me than my health. My Bible, the little book I had carried every single day, the one that had the picture of the 10 Commandments. I was devastated. I told the men, I can't go home without it. What happened next still brings tears to my eyes. The entire company, the same men who had once thrown shoes at me, went back up onto that ridge. They combed the battlefield under enemy fire until they found that Bible in the dirt. They mailed it to me in the hospital. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just saved their lives, I had won their hearts. On October 12th, 1945, I stood on the lawn of the White House. I was trembling, not from fear, but from awe. President Harry S. Truman hung the Medal of Honor around my neck. He shook my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." I didn't fight for a medal. I didn't fight for glory. I fought for the man next to me. I proved that while war is a time of killing, it doesn't have to kill your soul. You can walk through the fire of hell and still hold on to what you believe. They called me a conscientious objector, but I like to think of myself as a conscientious cooperator. Because in a world determined to tear itself apart, the bravest thing you can do is try to put it back together.